Good afternoon, everybody. This is Dave with Judge 99 Sports Cards. I'm here today to talk about a subject that's been coming up in the hobby or been talked about in the hobby for the last several weeks, and I wanted to wait and see everybody's responses to it before I even said anything about it. And that's the topic of shill bidding. And I'm going to broaden it out today a little bit and talk about auctions, online auctions, different kinds of auctions where the rules are different and how it might implicate shill bidding or make shill bidding harder or easier to do depending upon the format of the auction. The first thing I want to say is nothing in this video should be taken as legal advice. This is my personal opinion only, and I am not in any way trying to tell anybody how to conduct their business or whether they should seek the advice of a lawyer if they have questions. The other thing I want to say is obviously this came up with the whole snipe website, Rick Probstein, and on his website or new website that has already shut down, came off of eBay. I didn't know anything much about Probstein other than he was a big eBay seller. I'd seen him on YouTube several times. Seemed like a good businessman, a guy that was trying to do something. And then he has this auction, and it can't even pull off one auction without shutting down the website. A bunch of allegations are made about him shill bidding. I don't know anything about any of those. I've never seen the evidence. I'd like to see the evidence, but I'd like to hear from Rick Probstein. Now, obviously, he's probably been told by a lawyer, don't say anything about it, but to me, that tells you everything you need to know. You can't just come out and say we were hacked and not tell us more about the evidence that was put out there, and if it's false evidence showing shill bidding and whatever it is, but addressing that in some way. So for me personally, I would never do business with the guy. So he's gone back on eBay. People can do what they want to do, but I'd like to hear from him, and the fact that he hasn't for over a week or two said anything about it, it tells me a lot. So let's talk about shill bidding. We had the whole Dr. Beckett, Patrick Ryan controversy. I'm not going to get into the details of that other than to say, I respect both of those guys. I respect people that try to help their friends. I have no issue with any of that. However, this is not complicated. And with all due respect to Dr. Beckett, what shill bidding is not complicated. If you bid on your own stuff, or you have somebody else bid on your own stuff with the intent to defraud or harm others, in other words, impact the market price of the item, it's shill bidding. Period. End of story. You can't do it. It's illegal. Not only that, it's unethical and immoral. Everybody puts things, everybody that sells or every dealer that sells once in a while will dip their toes into selling stuff on auction. Well, you take a risk when you sell stuff on auction. If you want to guarantee yourself a certain price, you have to set a reserve or sell it on a buy it now situation. That's how you get to control the price. If you don't have a reserve, you have to be willing to sell the item for a small bid. And the upside is you get a chance of maybe getting more than the value of the item, but you certainly risk getting less than the value of the item. And that's the whole point of an auction. So what shill bidding is not complicated. You can't do it, and there's no such thing as defensive shill bidding. It's all shill bidding. Period. Buying your own cards at an auction is unethical. Don't put them up on the auction. Set a reserve if you need to have a certain price for that item. Sell it at a buy it now if you need to have a certain price for that item. But if you're putting it on an auction, you've made the decision to risk getting less than it's worth. And you have to live with that. So just covering yourself by, I'm just going to bid it up to the low comps so I get a decent price for it, that's shill bidding. And it's illegal, and you shouldn't do it. And it's that simple. Now, the whole talk that I heard when I heard Dr. Beckett talking about this, about, auction houses, they allow bids, house bids up into a reserve, and blah blah blah, and then it's not really straightforward what shill bidding is. BS. If an auction house has self bidding or house bids below the reserve, who cares? There's a minimum bid. The reserve is the minimum bid. If you're not willing to pay the minimum bid, don't bid on the item. I don't care whether the auction house bids it up right to the minimum. It's irrelevant. It's not a shill bid because it's an irrelevant bid. It doesn't impact the sale of the item. If it gets you to bid on something because somebody else is bidding on something, well then that's your problem. Because you shouldn't just be bidding on something because somebody else is bidding on it. So auction rules that allow house bids up to the minimum or reserve are not shill bids. Period. Because they don't impact the sale of the item. They don't affect the market. So therefore it's not a shill bid. It doesn't muddy the waters on shill bidding. It muddies the waters on certain rules that auction houses have, that other auction houses don't have, that you need to know if you're going to participate to protect yourself. So if the reserve is not known, and I haven't participated, I participate in a lot of online auctions, but I haven't seen one that didn't tell me when you made a bid, reserve not met, that there's a reserve, or that even identified what the minimum bid was going into it. Because to me, if I see a minimum bid, then I've got to figure out, is that minimum bid plus the buyer's premium plus the shipping, is that a price that I'm willing to pay for that item? Because if I'm not at the minimum bid with all those calculations, well then I'm not even bidding on the item, right? So anything that happens below the reserve doesn't matter. Now, if the auction house doesn't tell you there's a reserve, and you make a bid and it tells you reserve not met, but you don't know what it is, it really doesn't change anything, although I don't think that happens very often. I don't think it should be legal to hide a reserve, but that doesn't necessarily change it. If nobody knows that there's a reserve, well then you could argue that a bid below the reserve is a shill bid, but in fact it really doesn't change the minimum bid for the item. So know your rules. The first thing I want to talk about is know the rules that you're participating in when you're participating in auction. eBay's easy. Everybody knows what the rules are on eBay, and that's why people participate in their auctions, because they know what the rule is. You can't shill bid. You can set a reserve or not, and that's your choice. So when you're participating in online auctions, the first thing, or any auction, the first thing you need to know is what is the buyer's premium. The buyer's premium is going to be charged on top of your bid when you buy the item. So you need to know what it is. And these buyer's premiums, they can be 10%, they can be 12%, they can be 15%, they can be 18%, they can be 20%, they can be 25%. So you need to know that information, because that is telling you how much over the bid that you're going to have to pay, and that factors in if you're deciding to buy an item. If you have to purchase an item at a certain price in order to flip the item or get a decent value for something you're putting in your PC, you need to know that buyer's premium to know whether or not that bid is a reasonable bid. There have been many auctions where I've seen the minimum bid, I factor in the buyer's premium, and I can't pay that price for the item. So know that going in up front. Know the shipping charges. Some of these auction houses will be reasonable with you with your shipping. They'll send you a few cards in a $4 or $5 envelope, and that's fine. But some of them will charge you $15, $20 no matter what you buy. And I understand if you're buying something that's big and takes unusual packaging, but when you're buying cards, that should never be the case, because cards, you can put 20 cards in a box and ship it for $4. So there's a lot of things you need to know about those shipping rules that different companies are using, or auction houses, that they vary. Obviously on eBay or whatnot, or Fanatics Collect, you're going to know pretty much what the shipping charges are, but some of those auction houses you're not going to know. So you got to know that. You need to know whether this is going to be an online only auction, or a in-person only auction, or a combination, because you see a lot of these combination auctions, folks. And let me tell you something. If you're bidding online and there is house live bidding at the end of the auction, expect those people to get favored, because not only do they get to see the items in person, they have relationships with the auction companies. They are locals. They know the folks that put on these auctions on a weekly or monthly basis, and there's relationships that are built. I bid on an item one time on a mantle card. It was a 63 mantle. I wanted the card for my PC. The bidding was in the 200s. On the day of the auction, I got tied up, so I entered a bid of $325 as my max bid. And at the time, which was 2 or 3 hours before the close of the auction, I was the winning bid at like 250 or 260. So the auction goes on. It closes. I go back and look, and I go back on high bid and look, and the auction says the winning bid was 325, which was my high bid. So I said, hey, I won this item. Well, for some reason, I made a mistake that day trying to save a few bucks on the difference in buyer's premium between bidding on high bid and bidding on the local auction house. So I registered for the local auction house to save a few bucks, made my bid through that house, and the maximum bid wasn't honored. Nothing happened for several days. I finally called the auction house, and the guy told me, well, we had a local that bid on that and drove several hours to get here, and he won it for $325. I said, well, how did he win it for $325? I've already had that in before he bid as my max bid. Well, it's my auction. I can basically do what I want. So just understand that if you're competing against in-person bidding at the time that you're bidding online, sometimes that might not go your way. So that's you might want to stay away from some of those auctions, or at least only deal with auctioneers, auction companies that you know, because they're not all the same. Some of them are fairer than others, trust me. The other thing is, when you're buying on some of these online auctions, it's not like eBay that you might get a dozen pictures of the item. You might get two. You might get one. A lot of them don't even show you the back of the card. Be advised of that. If you don't see the back of the card, you probably ought not bid on it, because it might be a reprint and you don't know it. There are a lot of reprints on these online auctions. There are a lot of fake autographs on these online auctions. Be aware that you don't buy fake stuff that's not probably certified by one of the top companies, because there's a whole bunch of certification companies out there that are questionable. Okay? There's one called Heritage Authentication, which when you see Heritage, you think of Heritage Auction House. Well, they're not related. I didn't know that. I assumed it was a Heritage item, and it wasn't. It was Heritage Authentication. So there's a difference. You got to know when you're buying autos and things like that, that they have to be well certified. If you're buying stuff without good pictures, assume the item isn't in as good a condition as you think. When you're buying vintage cards, for example, the values often wildly change depending on condition. So you're not going to have the same information to base that decision on condition when you're bidding on some of these online auctions, instead of buying a card on eBay or something where you get a lot of pictures. And even that is not perfect. Pictures obviously are not a perfect judge of condition. So I always try to assume one level below what I think the card is when I'm buying at an auction. Is this value, is this price that I'm paying good if this card is actually in a little less good condition than I think? Because if it is, I don't want to be stuck with a price that I paid for a X card when this is clearly VG, and the VG value was below what I paid. So you got to be careful about condition when you're looking at some of these cards, especially when the value is largely determined by the conditions. So I'm fixing to wrap it up here. The bottom line is, when you go on one of these online auctions, make sure you know what the rules are. Make sure you know the buyer's premium. Make sure you know what they charge for shipping, and factor all that in before you bid. If an item has a minimum bid, figure out what you need to pay for it. If you're flipping an item, if you're buying an item because you think that's a good deal and I can sell this card for more, well, then when you're buying it with a buyer's premium and with shipping and with tax and all that, you're going to have to be paying, if you're not paying 50 to 60% of the comps, you're not going to make money. Because let's say you pay 60% comps and then you pay 20% buyer's premium. And then eBay is going to charge you 15% when you sell it. Well, there's no money in there to be made. So you've got to get it well below comps in order to buy and flip with the buyer's premium. Now, if you factor the buyer's premium, obviously you don't got to get it, 30% below, and there's 15% for you and 15% for eBay. But if you're not factoring in that buyer's premium, you're never going to flip a card you buy at an auction and make a profit or make a good profit. So always know the rules before you bid. Always know the comps before you bid. So know the highest you can possibly pay for the item depending upon what you're going to do with it. If you're keeping it for your PC, well then as long as you get it at a reasonably close to comps, well then it's okay, it's going in your PC, right? You want the card regardless of value. But if you're buying it to resell it, then you've got to be really careful. And usually if you don't buy at about 50% of comps, you're not going to make money. You're not going to make a lot of money after you factor in the buyer's premium and eBay costs and all your costs, not to mention shipping and handling and packing and all that stuff. So know the rules, know the comps, make smart decisions, and don't shill bid. We all know what it is. It's not complicated. Don't do it. This is Dave, Judge 99 Sports Cards. Thanks for your time. Please like and subscribe the video. Make some comments if you have any comments. Ask me questions. I'll be more than happy to respond. And thanks for your time and watching.